Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to, or good evening, or whatever time it is in the world. I am Ronaldo Mackenzie, and I am the host and creator of the Neoliberal podcast, which is a global podcast in news commentary. But I also teach a course. I'm as an adjunct lecturer at the Jamaica Theological Seminary on Fridays from 6 to 9 p.m., a course that I've taught before entitled Caribbean Thought, and I've added towards developing a Caribbean academic journal. Let me begin. One of the reasons I'm doing this particular this video podcast, which is also an academic podcast geared towards college students who are studying post-colonialism, especially those who are of the Caribbean diaspora or those who are of that generation and speak to that culture and so on. There's much happening, and I've oftentimes cited people who are from Jamaica or from the Caribbean or from overseas, who, when the new generation comes along, there is this disconnectedness. They don't know the language, they've never been to the country, or they don't know what's going on and so forth. And so we have a responsibility to the people that the generation comes after us. They must know what's going on. So, and of course, we talk about the ban in Florida when they're hiding the truth. But this is a remake or rerun of a 5-hour lecture I did some time ago, last week Friday, and it's available on the podcast. The previous, it's available on the Neoliberal podcast, and we have several feeds, several journals, websites, and so on and so forth, where you can access all of the information that I have. But I did a 5.5-hour lecture on Friday of last week. It's 5.5 hours, and that's probably might be too long for many people. 5.5 hours is quite long. So what I've done is that I'm redoing this podcast or this video presentation. Some of the students who are saying that it's too long. So this is and for the general public and for anybody who wants to access this particular podcast. So this is a summarized version of the 5.5-hour lecture, which is week 3 of the course Caribbean Thought, looking at, and we are laying the foundation. We are conceptualizing the course Caribbean Thought, which is quite an interesting course. I actually, while preparing to do this presentation, there's a book that I got from a very good friend of mine, my professor who's working on the book with me, Neoliberal Globalization Reconsidered. It's entitled The Social Origins of Democratic Socialism in Jamaica, written by Nelson Keith and Novella Keith. And I believe that they were professors at the university. And there's a little bit about them in the book, but they do a very good job in terms of looking at democratic socialism in Jamaica, in terms of looking at the development of it. So if you read this book, looking at the origins of social democratic, the social origins of democratic socialism in Jamaica, if you read this book, you get a sense of what's going on in the entire West English-speaking Caribbean, because I'll tell you that the book Life and Death was written about, the film Life and Death, and it's available if you go to Netflix or you go to the 2001 Netflix film. It's not Netflix actually, but it's a film written by that comes from the book A Small Place, written by Jamaica Kincaid. Stephanie Black directed Life and Death. But that film is based on the book A Small Place about Antigua. But the book is about Antigua, but the film is about Jamaica. But so you see, you can take up what's going on in one Caribbean island, English-speaking Caribbean island, especially those that have certain European influences, Europe and Spain and England. And it's almost the same experiences. It's quite interesting. And, that's one of the most powerful and strident things. That's one of the most powerful things that I arrived at as I read, and it was Rita Bernard at the University of Pennsylvania that introduced the film Life and Death to me. And I found that quite powerful. But while preparing to do this summarized version of the 5.5-hour lecture that I gave on Caribbean Thought last week, Friday, I picked up this book and I started reading, and I said, I remember it's on the syllabus, but I have to get the students to delve into it. According to written by people, probably first generation Jamaicans or maybe they're not. But listen to the introduction, how the book starts. Jamaica is an island nation state situated 90 miles to the southwest of the southernmost tip of Cuba, a former British sugar colony. It has a population of about 2.3 million people. Like most other plantation economies, Jamaica has suffered from underdevelopment, which has led to discontent and unrest. Again, the book starts. So if I were to ask the students, and I'm thinking about doing this, define for me in one sentence or in two sentences, how would you define Jamaica? One or two sentences. Define Jamaica in one or two sentences. So define the Caribbean, or define your island, your Caribbean island. Define your Caribbean island in one or two sentences. It would be quite interesting to me. I would marvel at the response and probably just ask this. Define Caribbean in one or two sentences. But listen to the definition of that Keith and Novella started in the introduction of the social origins of democratic socialism, written by this is how they start. Jamaica is an island nation state situated 90 miles to the southwest of the southernmost tip of Cuba. Is actually not Jamaica, is 90 miles south of Cuba. A former British sugar colony. It has a population of about 2.3 million people. Like most other plantation economies, Jamaica has suffered from underdevelopment, which has led to discontent and unrest. This is quite powerful. This is quite terse, but it gets to the point because they talk about the geographic, where it is geographically. They talk about the past, the influence, and talk about the fact that it was a colony, meaning they were colonized by who? By British. And it talks about the population now, but then it doesn't go into the population of people. The population of 2.2 million people, and it stops there. So that says a lot, but it doesn't say a lot. But what it says is that, like most, listen to this part, talking about the symbiotic relationship between the Caribbean islands and the global South islands that come out of colonization. Like most other plantation economies, Jamaica has suffered from underdevelopment, which has led to discontent and unrest. And then they go on to say by saying, perhaps the most famous demonstration of this discontent in recent times is the labor rebellion of 1938. The rebellion, which driven by economic deprivation and political powerlessness, forced into place new economic and political forms. Democracy and political power improved, and there was a steady institutionalization of liberal democracy as the formal requirements for a competitive political system with free and fair elections and related institutions designed to maintain public liberties were set in place. After a process of gradual decolonization that began in 1940, Jamaica secured its independence on August 6, 1962, like most Caribbean islands. This time was between the 1950s was a lot of democratic socialism being introduced, a lot of fight for freedom and so on. By the 1960s, many of these small states got independence, except for countries like Haiti that already was independent. Maybe they were independent. I'm going to be talking. I met up with someone who is from Haiti. I took an Uber today to go to Westchester, and I interviewed and I had a chat with this Uber driver who is from Haiti, a woman, and we talked for about 40 minutes, just about what's going on in Haiti, the Caribbean, and some of the work that I do. It's quite powerful. You'll get to hear that later. But this is how I begin today. This summary of democratic socialism. Sorry, I won't begin that, but this is how this book began. But this book largely just looks at the social origins of democratic socialism. Democratic socialism it was morphed into dependent capitalism. And it doesn't talk about, it will reference Edward Seaga, which is very important. Now, as we look at Caribbean law, I said to you, this particular course is actually, um, this particular course is actually, this particular course is, bring it up, is a reflection, a summary of my last class, and I had to begin with this. And this is quite powerful with this particular class. Now, I talk about, I summarized the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of this class is really conceptualizing the course Caribbean. We're going to, next week or Friday, this Friday is going to begin with, but we are conceptualizing Caribbean thought. And of course, it begins with, we just presented to you a definition by Keith, Novella and Nelson Keith, the understanding of Jamaica, but within, so looking at the social origin of socialism. But we are here conceptualizing the post-Caribbean thought. And I just want to put it in summarize general argument, general perspective from the last class. And I begin by saying this, and I actually wrote this and sent it to the students. Today we explore the question of the Caribbean in light of the conceptualization of the course Caribbean thought. We ask, when we study and reflect on Caribbean thought, including diverse currents that have shaped its present, that speaks to a future, how far must we go back? How far must we go back? And let me ensure that I am recording. I am recording. How far must we go? Where must we start? Notice when I picked the definition of Jamaica, they introduced, the authors here introduced Jamaica by saying Jamaica is an island nation state situated 90 miles to the southwest of the southernmost tip of Cuba, a former British colony, a former British sugar colony. It has a population of about 2.3 million people. Like most other plantations, other economies, Jamaica has suffered from underdevelopment. So I ask you, how far must we go back? Where must we start? The authors here start from Jamaica being a former British colony. That's where they start. But the answer is a complex one, because we stated in class that the Caribbean is an invention of the past, which must now reinvent itself in the future if we are to surpass the challenges of the present. We say the Caribbean is uncompetitive, stemming from a violent past that continues today through neoliberal globalization. We did not explore neoliberal globalization, but provided an understanding of neoliberalism, neo-capitalism, and capitalism. We explain neoliberalism as a form of liberalism used within economics by capitalists to liberalize economies, or their techniques to liberalize economies so as to penetrate or to allow for penetration, thereby ensuring profit. And and that definition is aligned with every single scholar. If you read Novella, Keith and Novella, if you read Ian Beruma, if you read G. William Dumbo, if you read Frantz Fanon, Hobie Mab, if you read Dale Johnson, Social Inequity, Economic Decline and Plutocracy, which I was reading that book. Quite powerful book that looks at America today, looks at the American situation today as an extension of what's going on, as a picture of what's going on in the world, and how neoliberal globalization affects the world. But we explain neoliberalism as a form of liberalism used within economics and by capitalists to liberalize economies so as to penetrate, thereby ensuring profit. And we are going to delve into that a little bit more. When we talk about liberalizing economies, there's several things that involved, and I'm going to borrow from Michael Crozier in looking at the bureaucratic phenomenon, because in it, the bureaucratization of the world through the IMF and the World Bank and the world involved several several different things that has to be done in order to advance liberalism, in order to advance this free world, this free market, which is, and that's very important. So we said that we will explore the neoliberalism in more detail later in relation to its effects on the Caribbean when we watch Life and Death by Stephanie Black, based on the book A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid, a book about Antigua whose experience of structural adjustment and fight for prosperity resembles Jamaica's, so that the film could take from the book and talk about Jamaica. This speaks to the symbiotic relationship between the West Indies. We examine the processes of colonization from the perspective of Fanon, who defines colonization as involving a violence of depersonalization, which is the stripping away of the individual. We provided an academic answer and response to the question, are white-collar crimes in Jamaica a result of colonization? And why are crime rates so high in places like Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica? We suggested a Marxist materialist reply, relative deprivation. What is relative deprivation? We defined it as the correlation between high crime and the correlation between high crime and violence and high poverty and income inequality. Jamaica and the Caribbean suffers from high poverty and income inequality, correlated with the highest which correlates with high income inequality and poverty. Again, let me say that the Jamaica and the Caribbean suffers from high poverty and income inequality, which correlates with high crimes and income and high crime rates in the Caribbean. This is commensurate with what is happening in Black and brown communities all over the world, hence supporting the conclusion and the analysis of relative deprivation. We pointed out that to study Caribbean thought is to do philosophical inquiry, which involves logic and reason and an understanding of Descartes' phenomenology, who coined cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I. He recognized the subjectivity of reality outside of objective verification. Further, we pushed the exploration of knowledge by discussing Immanuel Kant, who says that history is a result of human nature and circumstances, and he questions Newtonian physics, which formed the basis of Western civilization's understanding of reality. So the Caribbean, as part of a reality of Western civilization, is influenced by that bent. And just so you know, this is Immanuel Kant's book, a powerful book that was edited by Louis Whitebeck. So this is the translated edition, edited by Louis Whitebeck, Immanuel Kant on history. And we delved into this a little bit because we did say that Kant was a philosopher that seems singularly unlikely to encourage a philosopher to take history seriously. He said Immanuel Kant was not a historian. He was not an historian. In his literary remains, we find this note. I shall not make any head into a parchment and scribble old, half-effaced information from archives on it. He was a philosopher, with a philosophy that seems singularly unlikely to encourage a philosopher to take history seriously. His critique of pure reason studied the foundations of knowledge, but by knowledge he meant almost exclusively Newtonian physics, and by foundations he meant unchanging a priori forms and categories of the mind, changing a priori forms and categories of the mind. His critique of practical reason studied the foundations of ethics, but from them everything anthropological, having to do with the varieties of human nature and circumstance, and everything historical, because history is a result of what? Human nature and circumstance. So he says everything historical concerning the development of moral codes and institutions was ruled out as irrelevant and even dangerous in the study of morals. And that is why he ruled out Newtonian physics, because for Newtonian physics seemed everything unchanging, as if they come to knowledge and truth as a statistician, that everything is static, not moving and unchanging, or everything that comes from, or things that come from, or anything that what we have, anything that comes from the, all things that come from anything is an anything that does not change. He challenges that. There is nothing that, everything that we have today, he questions as coming from that, from an understanding, from an ethic, from moral codes and reasoning. It's not a rock that, or a plant that comes from roots. The roots are themselves opinions of man which have been formulated into something that is concrete, which Newtonian physics have come to theorize as all things come from that. So he questions that particular logic. We're going to get into that because that might be confusing if you know what I'm talking. You don't wake up casually. You have to delve into the 5-hour lecture and the reading that we're going to do. But we'll talk about that. But listen to the point I'm making here. So we point, as we begin to study Caribbean thought, we pointed out that to study Caribbean thought is to do philosophical inquiry, which involves the logic and reason and an understanding of Descartes' phenomenology. He point, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He recognized the subjectivity of reality outside of objective verification. You can't know anything outside of yourself. The only thing you can know for certain is the truth that stares you in the face. The mind that tries to say nothing exists is, okay, something exists, and that you cannot deny. So he recognizes the subjectivity of reality outside of objective verification. Further, we push the exploration of knowledge by discussing Kant, we just referenced here, who says that history is a result of human nature and circumstance, and questioning Newtonian physics, which forms the basis of Western civilization, on Western civilization's understanding of reality. The Caribbean as part of a reality, the Caribbean taken as part of that reality of Western civilization is influenced by that bent. We reviewed, and so from that we reviewed the economic history of Western society and capitalism, stating that it is within a system that has impoverished or weakened the Caribbean states. We visited Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, and Marx, Weber, Max Weber, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, regarding the justification and economic principle behind capitalism. However, we challenged the Wealth of Nations by invoking Karl Marx, who critically re-examined Adam Smith's accumulation of the capital idea, saying that it was not won in hard work, but theft and violence. Again, let me say that again. We reviewed the economic history of Western society and capitalism, stating that it is within a system that has impoverished or weakened the Caribbean states. We visited Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, and Karl Marx, and Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism, regarding the justification and economic principle behind capitalism, because when the fathers and the most dominant influences and theoreticians or theologians, for want of a better expression, behind capitalism and the capitalist society in Western civilization comes from Karl Marx and Adam Smith. And Adam Smith's work is influenced by Jean-Baptiste Colbert from France. However, we challenged the Wealth of Nations by invoking Karl Marx. Because according to Max Weber and to Adam Smith, society is about hard work, and it's built on certain ideas about the markets, about demand and supply and labor. And later on, when you read Neoliberal Globalization, we talk about monopoly capital and labor, talking about how the large organization and how work is changing, and even as we move beyond to the 21st century. And that book written by Richard Braverman. Rich Edward and Braverman, talking about how labor is changed, how labor changed, and looking at the monopoly capital, how capital has monopolized labor within that hierarchical structure. But if you move to the tectonic age, you move to the 21st century, 2020, 2021, 22, you look at how work is changing. It questions those very notions, and that is how you do. This is how you study. This is how you look at how society is changing, the dynamic of society. But what we're saying is that Karl Marx questioned those very notions of hard work. Money does. He says, we invoke Karl Marx, who critically re-examines Adam Smith's accumulation of capital, because Adam Smith talk about what gave rise to capital, what gave rise to wealth, what gave rise to profit, what gave rise to the capital in this society, and he pointed to hard work. But Karl Marx says, no, he challenges that. It's not about, and then remember we said, if history is a result of human nature and human circumstance, then it's not far-fetched to see somebody like a Karl Marx challenging Adam Smith's theory, talking about how capitalist societies arrive and derive their wealth in the first place, the accumulation of capital. He critically re-examines Adam Smith's accumulation of capital idea, talking about the socio-economic history of the world, saying that it was not won in hard work, but theft and violence. This then led us to consider the socio-economic and political interests of the Caribbean, such as Michael Manley and Fidel Castro, who were nationalists influenced by Marxist critique of capitalism and his idea of communism. Caribbean political and literary thinkers were off-center and regarded as democratic socialists, which had threatened American domination and penetration in the region. So what they had believed was given given way to socialist ideology. And of course, you can read again the book that I referenced earlier, Nelson Keith and novella Keith, and the film Life and Death, and talks about, and several other theorists talked about this particular issue. Again, let me say this again. I said this led us to consider the socio-economic and political interests of the Caribbean, such as Michael Manley and Fidel Castro, and Edward Seaga, who were nationalists, but Edward Seaga was not influenced by Marxism. He was more of the Reaganomics spin. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. Michael Manley and Fidel Castro, who were nationalists influenced by Marxist critique of capitalism and his idea of communism. Caribbean political and literary thinkers were off-center and regarded as democratic socialists, which had threatened American domination and penetration in the region to what they had believed was giving way to socialist ideology. However, there are those who sided with the former Nazis, who opposed the local socialist nationalists, such as Edward Seaga, former Prime Minister of Jamaica, regarded as the promoter of Reaganomics in the Caribbean and Thatcherism. The tension between Michael Manley and Edward Seaga represented one of the most defining periods in Jamaica's history, much like other countries in the Caribbean that suffered the same violent political fate, where Edward Seaga, American capitalism, and Manley, democratic socialists, embodied the global tension between the East and the West. This has helped to exacerbate Jamaica's problems of gang violence. Political corruption and the debt burden has deepened Jamaica's economic outlook, and globalization has not guaranteed any prosperity but left Jamaica and the Caribbean vulnerable. Yet we ask, is there a father of modern Caribbean economics? Is there a father of modern Caribbean economics? Further, we explored solutions. It's probably Edward Seaga or Michael Manley, who is talking to us, or probably those before them, like Buster Mantle and Norman Manley. Further, we explored solutions to the black position that is characteristic of the Caribbean people's experience. Again, we explored solutions to the black position that is characteristic of Caribbean people's experience, who are dense with a population of African descent, whatever that means. By looking at critical race theory and what black scholars such as Dana Berry White is doing to reinvent and reimagine the black man and black woman, the brown woman and brown woman, moving away from a victim and defeatist approach to a hero approach, looking for the hero within the slave. So we looked at that kind of drive to reimagine a different history so as to cultivate hope within the present for a better future as we think about Caribbean today and opportunities for the future. Moreover, we challenged Edith Clarke and Rex Nettleford's analysis of the organizational dynamics in some Jamaican rural communities and some Caribbean rural communities. In the book, My Mother Who Fathered Me, Rex Nettleford and Edith Clarke, or Rex Nettleford actually contributed to the foreword, tried to explain concubinage and illegitimacy within these communities as coming from an African heritage, as if they know that Africans did not have family or a sense of monogamy and the structure. They provided an analysis learned from traditional sociology and functionalism that suggested that slaves were primitive and backward, and that the behaviors of the Caribbean resembled it, and that the behaviors of some of the Caribbean people in these rural communities resemble and come from that. Yet the connections between cultures were disrupted, and the idea of the individual became a dormant memory. Again, let me say that. The connections between cultures were disrupted, and the idea of the individual became a dormant memory. It is not true that Africans did not have any sense of family. It is not true that Africans did not have any sense of religion. That thinking is corrupted and inherited, as even with pure intentions, as people tried to explain why black families and why black people behave in the Caribbean, in the New World, behave the way they do, and they tried to find linkages in Africa. But even Africa itself was ravished by Europe, so that you don't even know what gives. You have to go into some of these Igbos and some of these other more historical tribes that were untainted by European domination to find out, and you see a sense of family, a sense of religion, a sense of culture and pride. But we have corrupted African cultures and dominated it by saying, oh, they never had no family, they had no sense of this, they had no sense of the individual, they never had no sophistication. That is why black people in the new world today, have no kind of sophistication. They're primitive and they're backward and they can't manage anything and they can't do anything because they have made it so. Okay, anyways. We concluded by discussing the reading. We concluded our class by discussing the reading. The Negro is not, and I quote, and we referenced this earlier, the Negro is not any more than the white man. Frantz Fanon in Black Skin, White Masks, Psychoanalysis of the Colonized, the systematically controlled man and woman. Again, we concluded by discussing the reading assignment in Black Skin, White Masks. The Negro is not any more than the white man. And Frantz Fanon in his book is referenced in this book, Wretched of the Earth, which is a translation by several different scholars, but Richard Philcox translated from French into English, forward by Homi Baba, also referenced in this book, and you should get a copy of this powerful book. It says, the Negro is not any more than the white man, end of quote. The Negro is not. And notice right here, the full stop right here. Let up a little bit. The Negro is not any more than the white man. Frantz Fanon in Black Skin, White Masks psychoanalyzes the colonized or the systematically controlled man and woman. He removes in saying This sentence is very powerful. This very powerful. Because in writing the way that he did, not subscribing to subject verb agreement, he removes the dominant view within comparisons, striving for the empowered self. According to Homi Bhabha, here, when he says that the Negro is not any more than the white man, in her book, and it's right here, The Location of Culture. Here, the familia of colonial controlled subjects is disturbed by a break. The Negro is not, full stop. By a break, a pause from the usual to reveal a truly authentic self. That's according to Homi Bhabha in the book, Location of Culture. The Location of Culture on Fanon. And I will add it to Homi Bhabha in her description here. In addition, his use of the period, the full stop, after the word not. His use of the period after not. Proceeding, and then proceeding with the capitalized A. Anymore. Represents an interruption and a break in standards of language. Again, let me say this. In addition, his use of the period after not, proceeding with the capitalized A, represents an interruption and a break in standards of language. Fanon is deliberate when he uses language that deviates from sentence, where the subject does not agree with verbs, and punctuations are misplaced as a violent attack and rebellion against the status quo. That was one way he promoted violence in his literary genius. When we hear of, and then I went on. We concluded with the second assignment that you were supposed to come back with for that week was to read my book, the preface of my book. When we hear in Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, because I wrote in that book, when we hear of Jamaica or the Caribbean, we think of beautiful islands with sun, sea, and sand, reggae music, cannabis, and Irish people like you, Cindy. People who are living out their best dreams, desires, and lives. But this book analyzes this motif, given the historical and current economic and political situation of Jamaica and the Caribbean and the global South, in an attempt to escape the diverse or the adverse realities of poverty, inequality, and injustice. The people of the global South finds themselves in North metropolises with very little agency and minimal change to their lives. In fact, except for the use of cleaning neoliberal waste, the immigrant is usually portrayed as an alien with 3 heads and big shop, seeking to steal and destroy the profit and disrupt society. As such, we will discuss Black, Brown, and Pan-African struggles for economic prosperity, justice, and freedom, and consider efforts, abilities, or inabilities to chart their own futures since decolonization and realize real political independence and economic prosperity. Perhaps they are charting their own course by the few corrupt members of the status quo, who are benefiting from partnerships with the neoliberal regime of the Washington Consensus, advocates of the bureaucratic phenomenon, while the masses are left behind. And that's taken from the book Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. And that's a powerful, I said, and this is a powerful, I said, we make, people have the opinions of thinking that Jamaica is a tropical island paradise. But little do they know what's going on. The beauty is the portion of the people live there. Or if they end up from majority. I mean, if you see what's going on in Jamaica, we corner off the the best and the most beautiful beaches. We sell them off to overseas. And then recently there was a story of people, of security people that they put at certain places. Of course, that's what happens when you have high crime, when you have when you situate paradises within countries where there's high crime and violence, and when there's high income inequality and poverty. We call that relative deprivation. But we can deal with that. But security is the key. That's the case. But Novella Keith and Nelson Keith talk about the investment in Jamaica. There's been heavy, and in the Caribbean, there's been quite a lot of investment in Jamaica. We're going to talk about that because Dane McGibbon wrote an article in the Jamaica Kincaid talking about maybe the answer lies in Jamaica, and it's part of my book, Neoliberal. Maybe the answer lies in Guyana. But if in the 50s when they discovered bauxite in Jamaica, people were saying maybe the answer lies in bauxite. But Jamaica is still where it is. Trinidad has oil. But Venezuela have oil. But the Congos, they have uranium. But there's a warfare going on while people stand on the sideline waiting waiting for them to topple and then for them to enter to save the day. But I mean Jamaica and the Caribbean and the global south countries, there's no lack in resources and in terms of people skill and so on. I was speaking with the woman from Haiti today. I said, what's going on in Haiti? She said, oh my God, I don't know what's going on in Haiti. Haiti is a case in itself. And I'm going to, after this, sometime tomorrow, I will release that, or maybe it will be available tonight. But Haiti is a case unto its own self. Haiti, she said, as if there's no hope in Haiti. They have political problems. There's fighting between the peoples there. There's instability in Haiti. And and if there is money there, and if they do find anything worthwhile, they're fighting over it, creates so much problems, it becomes useless. And then again, as I delve into this course, the answer lies in what is the ultimate of all things. And I talk about that. If you listen to the interview I did with Darlene of Haiti, she was driving me to pick up her car, and she does Uber. It was quite a powerful conversation. But she talks about inability of people to come together, and that has always done. I said, what is the ultimate of all things? That will become one with reality in all of our individuals. Listen to that next podcast coming up. That one is audio, it's not in video, but it's powerful. Thank you for listening to this summarized version of the 5.5-hour lecture that I gave last week. This is the Neoliberal podcast. We will continue to present video podcast and audio podcast. We will also talk about the news of the day. By the way, listen to my latest podcast, Solutions to Dealing with Police Brutality during the Cultural Violence. It's in the Neoliberal.com. I've also submitted some articles to the Spectacle, and I'm going to be featured in some new articles. And I've written several articles that you will see around the place. Check me out, man. I plan. I'm working hard to facilitate critical thinking, to move society forward, because I'm all about serving the world to itself through our community, which is very popular. Donate to us, support us. We need your support. We need your donations. All of what we offer is free, and we operate completely on donations. But we have a corporation because we cost. The books you have to purchase. The books the textbook that are the Neoliberalism. And there's another textbook I'm working on, and another textbook I'm racing behind. Some powerful books within post-colonialism, and looking at critically analyzing history and critically engaging with philosophy. Support us by going to anchor.fm/theneoliberal. Again, anchor.fm/theneoliberal. That is our first podcast in audio. And of course, you can visit us at theneoliberal.com, RenaldoCMcKenzie.com, RenaldoCMcKenzie.blogspot.com. We're available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, the Audible, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, Stitcher. Did I say Google Podcasts already? And several others which I may not have. Video, and we also have the Neoliberal Environment on YouTube. Take care and walk and send us feedback. Share this show with your friends, and please send me an email. Ronaldo.mckenzie@jtx.edu.jn or RenaldoCMcKenzie@gmail.com.